Imagine standing on a cold, rainy morning in London, outside Buckingham Palace. Hundreds of tourists from around the world are holding up their phones, waiting for a movement. And then they appear. Marching in perfect synchronization, soldiers dressed in bright red coats and wearing giant, fluffy black hats. These hats are so huge that they seem completely out of proportion. They cover the soldiers' eyes, stand almost 18 inches tall, and look like massive furry towers perched on their heads. To most visitors, it looks like an eccentric fashion choice, or perhaps a bizarre tourist attraction designed to amuse the public. But if you look closely, you will notice something even stranger. These soldiers are not performers. They are elite active-duty infantry soldiers holding combat rifles with sharp bayonets. They remain absolutely motionless, refusing to smile, speak, or acknowledge the crowd, even when people attempt to tease them. So why do these elite warriors wear giant, heavy black hats made from the fur of Canadian black bears in the modern world? The answer is not about fashion, luxury, or royal tradition. The truth is much darker, more dangerous, and deeply tied to psychological warfare on bloody battlefields centuries ago. To understand how a deadly psychological weapon turned into the most iconic helmet in the world, we have to travel back in time to an era when soldiers threw explosive iron balls with their bare hands. If you stand next to a British guard wearing one of these legendary hats, you will immediately feel small. The hat adds nearly 1.5 feet of extra height to the soldier. But long ago, this extra height was not intended to make the soldier look impressive to tourists. It was designed to trigger pure terror in the hearts of enemy soldiers on the battlefield. In the 17th and 18th centuries, military commanders realized something fascinating about human psychology. When a human being faces danger, size creates fear. An army that looks taller and larger can often break the enemy's spirit before a single weapon is fired. But how do you make ordinary men look like imposing giants? The secret was not in their weapons, but on top of their heads. Yet there was a major problem. Making a hat taller is easy, but making a giant hat that stays on a soldier's head during the chaos of battle is almost impossible. And when these hats were first created, they were meant for the most dangerous unit in the entire military, the Grenadiers. To understand where these hats came from, we have to go back to Europe in the late 1600s. During this time, gunpowder had transformed how wars were fought. A new terrifying weapon had appeared on the battlefield, the hand grenade. These early grenades were not like modern grenades. They were heavy, hollow iron spheres filled with black powder and fitted with a slow-burning rope fuse. To use a grenade, a soldier had to light the fuse with a burning match, run close to enemy positions, and physically hurl the heavy iron ball into the enemy lines. This job required immense physical strength, steady nerves, and exceptional height. The men selected for this deadly role were called grenadiers. They were the shock troops of their era, chosen from the absolute largest and strongest men in the army. At first, these grenadiers wore standard military hats with wide brims, known as tricorn hats. But they quickly ran into a frustrating physical problem. When a grenadier slung his long musket over his shoulder to light and throw a grenade, the wide brim of his hat would get caught on the gun barrel, knocking the hat off his head. Soldiers were constantly losing their hats at the precise moment they were lighting dangerous explosives. To solve this problem, military designers created a tall, brimless cloth cap that pointed upward, somewhat like a tall cone. This allowed the soldier to sling his musket freely without catching his hat. But soon, commanders noticed an unexpected side effect. The tall, pointed caps made these already giant men look astonishingly gigantic. The visual effect was so dramatic that armies began adding fur to these caps to make them look even larger, darker, and more intimidating. By the late 1700s, the tall fur hat, known as the bearskin, had evolved from a simple solution into a terrifying symbol of elite power. And no leader understood visual psychological warfare better than the Emperor of France, Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon built a legendary military force called the Imperial Guard. At the heart of this army were the Old Guard, a group of veteran soldiers who had survived dozens of brutal battles. Napoleon made sure his old guard wore tall, massive bearskin hats made from black bear fur. On top of the hats, they added bright red feathers to make them look even taller. When Napoleon's old guard marched onto a battlefield, the sight of thousands of massive fur-hatted veterans moving in perfect formation struck absolute terror into their opponents. Enemy lines would frequently break and retreat simply from the sight of these towering figures advancing through the gun smoke. For years, the bearskin hat was the ultimate symbol of French military dominance across Europe. It sounded like a perfect, invincible symbol of power. It wasn't. Because in the summer of 1815, on a muddy field in Belgium, Napoleon's famous guards encountered an enemy that refused to run away. The turning point in the history of the bearskin hat occurred on June 18, 1815, at the Battle of Waterloo. Napoleon was desperate for a decisive victory against the British army, led by the Duke of Wellington and their Prussian allies. Near the end of the day, as the battlefield filled with thick smoke and heavy rain, Napoleon decided to play his final, most powerful card. He ordered his elite Imperial Guard to march directly up the hill toward the British positions. The British soldiers waiting at the top of the ridge belonged to the 1st Regiment of Foot Guards. They were lying down in the tall grass to protect themselves from enemy artillery fire. As the French Imperial Guard marched up the slope wearing their towering bearskin hats, they appeared through the fog like unbeatable giants. To the French, victory seemed completely certain. That should have solved the battle. Instead, it led to one of the most famous surprises in military history. At the critical moment, the Duke of Wellington gave a legendary order: "Up guards and at them again." Hundreds of British infantrymen suddenly stood up from the high grass, forming a strict, disciplined line. They fired a massive, coordinated volley of musket fire directly into the advancing French columns. The sudden attack shattered the French forces. For the first time in history, Napoleon's elite Imperial Guard broke their lines and retreated in panic. The defeat of Napoleon at Waterloo brought an end to the Napoleonic Wars and reshaped the map of Europe. But it also created a unique military dilemma for the victorious British Army. How do you honor the brave soldiers who defeated the most feared military unit in the world? The British Prince Regent decided to award the victorious 1st Regiment of Foot Guards a rare honor. They were officially renamed the Grenadier Guards. But the honor did not end with a new name. As a symbol of their victory, the British Guards were granted the right to take the iconic headwear of the defeated French army and make it their own. The British troops took the tall black bearskin hats from the defeated French Imperial Guard as a war trophy. By wearing the high hats of the troops they had overcome, the Grenadier Guards declared to the world that they were now the premier infantry regiment of Europe. Over the next few decades, other elite regiments of British Foot Guards were also granted permission to wear the bearskin hat as part of their ceremonial uniform. If you are enjoying this deep dive into history and want to improve your English while learning incredible stories, make sure to subscribe to Origin Stories. We share hidden chapters of history every week. Now, back to our story. While the history of the bearskin hat sounds heroic, wearing one in real life is an extraordinary physical challenge filled with bizarre details and surprising engineering quirks. To begin with, each hat is made from the real pelt of a Canadian black bear. A single hat stands approximately 18 inches high and weighs between 1.5 to 2 pounds. When the fur gets wet in heavy rain, the hat absorbs water and becomes even heavier. Because the hats are so tall, they act like giant sails in strong winds. To keep the hat balanced, soldiers must hold their heads in a rigid vertical stance. But that wasn't the strangest part. If you examine how the guard wears the hat, you will notice a fascinating detail about the chin strap. Most helmets have a strap that goes directly under the chin to keep the helmet secure. However, the British Guard wears the brass strap resting under his lower lip, not under his chin. Why? This unusual placement is actually a clever safety feature born from brutal combat experience. During a battle, if a soldier wearing a giant, heavy hat was shot or struck in the head, the heavy hat would fall backward. If the strap were secured tight under his chin, the weight of the falling hat could easily snap the soldier's neck. By placing the strap under the lower lip, the hat can fly off the head safely without causing a fatal injury to the spine. It is a subtle design detail that saved countless lives on historical battlefields. Another peculiar challenge is heat. During hot summer ceremonies, guards stand completely still under direct sunlight while wearing heavy wool uniforms and dense fur hats. The heat inside the hat can become unbearable. Guards are specifically trained in a technique called fainting to attention. If a guard feels dizzy and knows he is going to pass out, he is taught to collapse forward in a perfectly straight, rigid line without breaking formation or bending his knees. To an untrained observer, all British guards look identical in their red tunics and tall black hats. However, there are actually 5 distinct regiments of foot guards that guard the sovereign today: the Grenadier Guards, the Coldstream Guards, the Scots Guards, the Irish Guards, and the Welsh Guards. So, how can you tell them apart? The secret lies in 2 subtle details: the feather plume on the bearskin hat and the spacing of the buttons on their red jackets. The Grenadier Guards wear a distinctive white feather plume on the left side of their bearskin hat, and their tunic buttons are spaced individually in single rows. The Coldstream Guards wear a bright red plume on the right side, with buttons arranged in pairs of 2. The Scots Guards have no plume at all on their bearskin hat, and their buttons are grouped in 3s. The Irish Guards feature a blue plume on the right side with buttons grouped in 4s, while the Welsh Guards wear a white and green plume on the left side with buttons grouped in 5s. These minor distinctions are maintained with intense pride, reminding every soldier of the specific history, heritage, and battlefield victories of their regiment. In the modern world, warfare has changed completely. Lightweight helmets made of advanced synthetic Kevlar have replaced fur hats, and camouflage uniforms have replaced bright red coats. The bearskin hat long ago retired from active combat, transitioning into a ceremonial uniform worn for royal events, state visits, and palace guard duty. Yet, as times change, new controversies have emerged. In recent years, animal rights organizations have voiced strong objections to the use of real Canadian black bear fur to make these military hats. Each year, the British Ministry of Defence purchases a small number of bear pelts to manufacture new hats and repair existing ones, as older hats can last for decades or even over a century when properly cared for. Governments and scientists have spent years experimenting with synthetic faux fur alternatives. However, military authorities report that synthetic materials struggle to withstand extreme weather. Fake fur often retains static electricity, absorbs rainwater, and mats in cold temperatures, unlike natural bear fur, which sheds water easily. The debate between preserving a 200-year-old military tradition and adopting modern synthetic alternatives continues to this day. When you stand outside Buckingham Palace today and watch the guards march past in their towering black hats, you are looking at a living museum. What appears at first glance to be an absurd, top-heavy fashion choice is actually a centuries-old war trophy, a physical reminder of a moment at Waterloo when the fate of Europe was decided in the smoke of battle. These giant hats remind us how history works in mysterious ways. Something created as a terrifying tool of psychological warfare by enemy grenadiers transformed into a badge of supreme honor, and ultimately became one of the most recognized cultural symbols of peace and royal tradition on Earth. What surprised you the most about the story behind these giant black hats? Let me know in the comments below, and check out another hidden chapter of history on our channel.